But because of the situation, actually, for the sake of actually being beneficial to the society, we chose to actually push the course forward. And so this is like a beta test course. We actually had a semester-long course planned for ideological warfare, but right now, because it's the need of the time, so we're conducting this course to actually give you an understanding and some basic tools which you can use to actually fight this war that is going on. And so Renewable Essentials is basically a broader project of introducing the kind of topics and the kind of discussions that are the need of the ummah for this time, right? So, like issues like domestic violence, like ideological warfare, reconstruction of the social sciences, and other such things. Inshallah, we'll be introduced to more of these if you stay tuned in the group. But at this moment, we're going to practice focusing on ideological warfare. My introduction was given with the group post, but basically, I have a decade experience within Islamic sciences and the humanities. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do while taking this course is because online learning and teaching, they're both difficult. Most of us have already experienced that. So block your time. Like take the time out without distractions. If you're on your phone or your phone's with you, you might want to put it on D&D or maybe turn off unimportant notifications. That's the first thing you could do. And the second is it would be really beneficial if you guys had a paper and pencil with you, right? So you can actually take notes of what's going on. And writing your insights as the course goes on, this is going to drastically help you in understanding the concepts and actually being able to implement them, right? Now, about this course, there are things that you should know. A lot of times you'll be thinking about, I probably know this stuff. And that is true because there are ideas discussed within the course which are not new to most of us. We already know them, but we know them like in separate parts. The purpose of this course is to join them all together in order to form a new field of studies. At this moment, we don't have class notes, but inshallah, they will be prepared afterwards and we will send them to you. And the slides, you will have access to them, inshallah, afterwards. So, right, so like I was saying, the first thing is that, so you know those things at different stages, but we're going to collect them all together to give it a form of a new subject which could be studied and then utilized. Second thing is because this is an introductory course, a lot of the times you are going to see uh, that we'll just touch on a topic and you'll be going like there should be more discussion on this, right? And everything that we touch on is something that you can expand into a whole book, but we won't have time to do that. So you will be facing situations where you'll think, oh, this needs more discussion and this needs more discussion. Inshallah, we will go to that maybe in the future, but for the purpose of this course, it is just an introduction of what's going to go on. With that in mind, let's commence without further notice. So, ideological warfare 101. Now, the first question that a person should ask is, why should I do something? Right? Before I ask what I'm supposed to do or how am I supposed to do it, it is better that you ask, why should I be doing something? Right? So, as Muslims, we have a duty, we are duty bound by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the task of da'wah because there are no other prophets that are going to come after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So each prophet that came before him and the Prophet Islam himself, they had the duty of giving da'wah, right? That was specific to the prophets themselves. But now, because there will be no prophet, the duty now lies upon every person who accepts Islam. And that was something so joined together with the Shahada that anybody who accepted Islam would automatically turn into a Da'i. For example, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when he accepted Islam, he brought six important people from Makkah the very first day to the Prophet Islam, and they all accepted Islam, right? A lot of Sahaba would just accept Islam, go back to their tribes, and start giving da'wah. So dawah is at the core of Islam, right? You can't separate the two. And this is like what we are, was best explained by a Sahabi Rabi ibn Amir, radiallahu anhu, when he was sent to Rustam, one of the Persian commanders and generals, and his words, they're worth writing in gold on our hearts. And he says, Allahu ibta'athana. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has sent us. We did not choose to come to you. We have no need for what you have in your lands. But the reason we come to you is because Allah has sent us. Why did He do that? لِنُخْرِجَ مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْ عِبَادَةِ الْعِبَادِ إِلَى عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ. Our first mission is whomever Allah wills through us is going to take them out from the worship of people, from the worship of people-made things, of materialism ila ibadatillah, to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمِنْ زِيغِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَى سَعَتِهَا, and from the constrictions of this dunya, of this worldly life, into its expansion. When you are too much involved in the dunya, you lose sight of the bigger picture, right? For example, what's going on in Gaza right now, you see all of the governments, all the Western governments, they're supporting Israel without any sort of boundaries, right? And what's happening is because they're focused on a very narrow thing, how to extract the best you can from the Middle East, right? They want whatever they're using Israel as a vanguard or as their representative in that region to get what they can out of the dunya. So they're not seeing the bigger picture. They're fixated upon getting what they can out of this dunya. So as Muslims, uh, one of our duties is to take people out of that closed mindset, out of that narrow vision, into seeing the broader picture. وَمِنْ جَوْرِ الْأَدْيَانِ إِلَىٰ عَدْلِ الْإِسْلَامِ, and to take them out of the transgressions of everything other than Islam, to the adl, to the justice of Islam. So adyan, though translated as religion, is not specific to that only. So any type of philosophy, any type of religion, any type of mindset, which is not according to Islam, which is going to result, maybe not in all aspects, maybe in some aspects, and sometimes could be completely evil, right? So that pressure, that restrictions, or that transgressions were there to help people out of it. So duty bound, that is why we should be waging in ideological war, right? To help other people out, to help ourselves out of the calamities that we're in. So this is the why of the question of the issue at hand, is why do this? But in order to actually do this, we need to know what ideological warfare is, right? Like, I want to drive a car, but if I don't know what a car is, I'm nowhere closer to driving it, right? So the first thing that we need to do is identify what is ideological warfare, and then automatically also know what is not ideological warfare, because a lot of times things become more clear when we know what it's not. The second is we'll talk about the history of ideological warfare, when it began and where it is now. And lastly, we will discuss about the case study of Palestine. It won't be more of a discussion from my side, but more from your side, because this is something that most of us are aware of. We are seeing social media, we're reading about it, we know what's happening. But once you get to know the tools, I would like you to use those tools and implement them in the Palestine case study. Now, different people have defined ideological warfare uh, differently. So, one of the opinions is that it is a war with non military resources. So, it is a kind of war, but you don't use military weaponry. So, it's a very broad definition. It tells you that anything which is non military and a war is being waged with it, that's ideological warfare. But the problem with this definition is it doesn't tell you what kind of war you're waging. Is this a war of ideas? Is this a war of gaining land? Is this a war of getting hold of the financial resources of the world? What kind of war is this? This definition does not tell you that, right? The only thing it tells you is that whatever kind of war it is, it should be done without military resources. And what is the aim and the objective of the war? That's also unclear. Another definition is that it is the sum of efforts any nation employs in order to conquer or influence another nation, right? And have them follow a certain path. So the sum of efforts. This tells us that ideological warfare can be both through military means and non-military means, but it has a special objective and goal in mind. That is to either conquer another nation or influence it to follow a certain path. Usually, it would mean to make that nation that you're conquering to follow your path, to follow your ideology or your systems, right? The third definition is it's a new war tactic against the Muslims after multiple defeats. And this is a more Islamic centric definition. Generally speaking, ideological warfare happens across the board. Everybody's doing it, right? But this course will be centered around the Islamic concept of it, right? And so this definition is taking that into account. So it is a war tactic used by the non-Muslimin against the Muslims after multiple defeats. And this actually is an indication to its historical background, which we will inshallah see later on, right? So it actually became an entire field of war uh, with a certain historical context in mind, right? But again, this definition, first of all, does not tell you the means that are going to be used in this war. It does not tell you the objective of this war, right? And this last definition, it tells you that a ideological warfare, it's a planned attack against the basic ideology of a hostile system. And the way you're going to wage this war, that it should be conducted with a vigorous effort in order to either gain acceptance or the very least tolerance of the basic ideas of our own system, are the ones waging the war. So there are a lot of things to unpack in this definition. And first of all, it is a planned attack. So the word plan is the first keyword. So you could be probably waging or using the techniques and tools of ideological warfare, but the fact that it's not planned, it's a retaliation or it's more of a reaction and not a response. So it should be planned. You could take, for example, that the boycotts that are happening, and it's a good thing that we're doing and we should keep on doing this, but we have to ask the question, is it really planned? This is not the first time this is happening. At least I can speak from the subcontinent perspective that whenever something against Islam happens anywhere in the world, we start boycotting products. So when Na'udhu Billah, the Prophet ﷺ was insulted or the Quran was insulted in Sweden or wherever other country, we start boycotting, right? But the second things cool down, we resume using the same products, right? So this boycott is not planned. We don't have like an objective in mind what we're aiming to achieve behind this. So although maybe a technique for the warfare, not actually part of it. So first thing is that it should be a planned attack, right? Against the basic ideology of a hostile system. Second keyword is basic ideology, right? So ideology, right? Some people describe IW as like a war of ideas, but you and I, or every single person in this meeting right now, could have different opinions on different subjects. Would that mean that we're always at war with each other, right? So that's where the word basic comes into play, that the fundamental ideology, the ideas and the philosophy on which the building of any nation or madhab is built, we're talking about that foundation and that ideology, right? Let's take our own example. You have the fiqh ikhtilafat, the differences in fiqh opinions. Like you have eight valid madhabs: Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, Ibbazi, Ja'fari, and Zahiri, right? You have these people with different opinions, right? And sometimes their differences, right, can actually transcend into something actually maybe even bigotry or even like using physical force. But at the end of the day, everybody's a Muslim. Everybody believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the messengers that He sent, the books that He revealed, the angels in the last day, in the divine decree and everything, right? So not every ideology or not every idea, not every philosophy uh, is the target of an ideological warfare. It is the foundational ideology which is the target, the basic on which, for us, for example, would be the Quran and the Hadith. If someone attacks that, that is attacking our basic ideology. If someone attacks the Prophet ﷺ and his being the last messenger, that is an attack against our basic ideology. So basic ideology, the key word here is the thing on which everything else is built on. So that is something that you target in the ideological warfare. For example, if we're targeting the West, what we're going to target as is individualism. So that is the basic philosophy that is driving the whole Western system, whether it's capitalism, whether it is this LGBTQ expression, and whatever is going on. It is based on the philosophy of individualism. So that is their basic ideology, right? And obviously, a hostile system is anything which is against you. And the system basically refers to social institutions and constructions on which society works on. They're not just going to attack, right? You're going to attack it because if you attack and destroy the ideology, that's not going to solve the problem because you need a replacement. Everything is going to be built upon some sort of idea, some sort of philosophy. So you need a substitute for that. So maybe you wage a war, get rid of capitalism, you get rid of the Western philosophy. What if communism takes place? That acts as a substitute. You don't want that to happen. So what you want to do when you're waging the war against a hostile system's basic ideology is to either gain acceptance for your own ideology or at the very least the tolerance. Maybe you won't be able to destroy the other's ideology, but if you can get the acceptance of your own ideology over there, then you can work on it to actually make it better. And then you can actually wage a war from the inside, right? And that is what the West did to us. That is exactly what the West did to us, that they've now inserted in the Self that we talk about Islamic capitalism or Islamic feminism. So the fact that you take their ideas, then turn them around, twist them a bit, and present them in Islamic fashion, that is telling that there is a degree of tolerance that we have for what is going on or what comes to us from the West, right? So actually, interestingly, this definition was taken from a CIA document, which was printed after the war that they had with USSR back in the day, right? And if you look at how they define ideological warfare, they did a pretty good job, right? So these are the four different opinions. There are many other definitions as well, but these were not targeting specific philosophies, because a lot of time in the Arab world, when they talk about ideological warfare, they start by saying that this was the Christians' way of fighting the Muslimin after they were severely defeated in the Crusades. But again, this is not specific to either ideological warfare is not specific to Muslims or Christians. Anyone with a different philosophy than you, like a life philosophy than you might be able to go to war with him, right? So these are four opinions. Now let's do a thought exercise. So how would you define ideological warfare? In light of what we just discussed, I want you to take a few moments to actually reflect on these definitions. And I want you to come up with a functioning definition for yourselves. What I mean by that is you can probably learn a definition, right, and keep repeating it, but that defeats the purpose. What we want is to have a definition that you understand completely. You know the ins and outs of it, and you can actually use that to make other people understand or even use it as a base for action. So take 5 minutes, right? And using what you just learned, make your own definition. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need fancy words like hostile system, basic ideology, whatever helps you understand the concept. So it's 22 now. At 27, inshallah, we'll continue. So you can keep this to yourself, and if you're confident enough, comfortable enough, you can also share it with us in the chat box. So take 5 minutes. I'll bring the slide back. Here's the detail. Make your own definition of what you think ideological warfare is, or at least what it should be. And if you have any questions in between, you can always put them in the chat box. Yes, inshallah, recordings will be made available on the YouTube channel. The link to that is given in the group description. And no, there are not going to be any exams this time around. Inshallah, in the more lengthier course, we will try to introduce that. But you will be given an optional reading list at the end to help you understand the concepts more about what this is. Right now, everybody is trying to define ideological warfare in their own words, a personal functional definition that will help you to understand and teach others or implement what ideological warfare is. If you've missed the beginning, it's okay. You can always go back to the recordings. They will be shared with you later on, inshallah. All right, that's nice. We have attempts. Uh, all right. Thank you guys for participating. Um, you can think on it later on as well, right? And maybe you might choose to change these definitions that you have as we progress further. But the goal is to actually be able to use. We don't want it to be something just theoretical, we want it to be something practical, but you need the theory in order to perfect the practice, right? So now let's go forward. So now that we define what ideological warfare is, in order to get a more clear picture, we'll talk about what it is not. And this is known as definition by elimination. So when you start cutting out things which is not ideological warfare, you get a more clear picture of what it should be, right? So one of the things is comparative religious studies. When we discuss ideological warfare as a science a subject, we will be introduced to different religions. You'll be introduced to Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and other religions as well. But it is not the same as comparative religious studies because comparative religious studies, it is basically an introduction to different religions. You learn about the beliefs, the history of a certain religion, the sources of that religion, and the biographies of the founders of those religions. And that is the intent and purpose behind comparative religious studies. It is to get introduction of that religion, and that is it. In ideological warfare, when you discuss a religion, when we study religion, it's not for the sake of knowing it, it's for the sake of actually using that knowledge to be able to, for about lack of better words, defeat it, right? So you want to know, for example, the claim that the Jews have to the Holy Land. Where does that claim come from? Is that even justified? And does that justify the elimination of innocent people? Or you could be asking, why is it that the Jews fail to see, or the Zionists fail to see, the humanity in other people, in the Palestinian people? Do they think of them as some of their leaders have been describing as human animals? Is it in their religion, or is it something that came up later, right? So you want to know where these ideas are coming from so you can challenge them. Is it actually in the Torah that they have the Holy Land, or is it in the Talmud? They're two different things. If it's in the Torah, then you're going to use a different set of techniques to argue with them. If it's in the Talmud, then you have a different set of techniques for argument and refuting their statements, right? So in comparative religious studies, you just get an introduction of what it is, and that is it. In IW, you don't need to know everything. You need to know exactly enough amount to be able to actually combat their ideas and combat their propaganda. That's one. Second of all is purification of the self, or tazkiyah, or tasawwuf as is known, right? So, for example, we see that there are problems in the Muslim society that they might be taking riba interest, for example, or they might be lying, right? Cheating is rampant in the society, in the Muslim communities, and one might be asking, well, is this because of enemy conspiracy? It could be, and it could possibly not be. I mean, it's very possible that a person is lazy in their prayers, not because there was some large scale American propaganda or an American conspiracy, but because some people are innately more lethargic, and that's why he's missing prayers, right? So Tazkiyah, it deals with moral illnesses and it deals with societal illnesses, irrespective of the cause, whether it came from an enemy source or was generated inside the person themselves, right? Ideological warfare might also discuss moral and societal ills, weaknesses a community might have, a person might have, but it is usually when the cause is known to be an enemy source, right? So that's a difference between purification of the self, between the self of tazkiyah, and between uh, ideological warfare, right? So basically, what the summary of all this is that da'wah, the work of da'wah, like I mentioned, it is the backbone of Islam. It is like this big circle, and ideological warfare is just subset of that big portion. So you will see a lot of things that will be matching with tasawwuf, that will be matching with da'wah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% the same thing. Part of it, but not the complete, right? So this is what ideological warfare is not. Now, before we go on to the next segment, I would like you to pause for a moment or two and actually think about the difference between ideological warfare and military warfare. I know it might, the first thing that comes to mind is that, well, there's military weaponry and here there's not. But what other differences can you actually think of? And just put them in the chat box. Okay, so language and not using language. The use of weapon and words. Right, different kind of armies are required. One's overt, the other's covert. Yep, that's a good difference. Less offensive and less shock value. All right, that's good. You guys are thinking, but let's discuss a few differences to get a more clear and larger picture of what the difference is. So the first thing is in ideological warfare, the enemy is usually unknown, right? You read an article somewhere that kind of talks against Islam, but not in an open way, right? For example, a lot of people like to hear public intellectuals, say Jordan Peterson, for example, right? And what he does is he first praises a certain thing and then talks about similarities between, for example, Islam and Christianity and Judaism, the Abrahamic Accords, trying to connect them in a source of Islam is basically just an extension, right? And maybe even an abrogation of Judaism, for example, one of his latest plans. So the enemy might usually be unknown in the sense that you either don't know where the article is coming from, where this propaganda is coming from, or maybe the figure is known, but the way they're actually going against you is unknown. This happens in the school curriculum a lot, especially if you're living in the West. It's in America, for example, in Canada, the LGBTQ community, for example, has a hold. You can't ignore them any longer. And in military warfare, you usually know who the enemy is, who you're fighting. Preparations and even attacks can sometimes go unnoticed in ideological warfare. Enemy preparations are actually quantifiable in military warfare. For example, what's going on right now. We know that IDF, for example, has this much in their main forces and this much in their reserve forces, right? And they have this much tanks, the US just sent two warships, etc. So enemy preparations in military warfare are usually quantifiable, but preparations for ideological warfare are not so much. You don't know, or we don't know what exactly is going on behind the scenes. We know that there's this media campaign going on, using dehumanizing terms, using different languages for casualties on both sides, right? That is something that we do know. We can see. We don't know what other things are going behind the scenes, right? So it's possible that there are a lot of other preparations going on from the enemy side we're not aware of. The target in ideological warfare seems to be hidden, while the target in military warfare is usually known. So we know exactly who the IDF is targeting at the moment, right? But at the same time, there could be an ideological warfare going on, trying to influence Muslims all over the world not to support, for example, the boycott of Israel, right? So there are other tactics that are probably using. The targets seem to be hidden, for example, buying out smaller companies owned by, for example, indigenous communities, the Muslim communities, right? And then funding Israel as they have been doing. So the target is the local population, and sometimes it's hidden. You don't even know who you're targeting. You just want to get that support to Israel. For example, New York City, they propose that any community, any business that sanctions and bans or protests against the injustices going on in Gaza, for example, they will be dealt with accordingly and similarly. They will be sanctioned and banned by the New York State. So the target uh, is hidden. It is not the normal consumer over here. It is basically businesses and, much more importantly, larger businesses, which bring in a lot of revenue. Those are their targets, right? And although it may seem like it's the individual customer or even small Muslim-owned businesses, it might as well be something as big as Microsoft. It would if it were not supporting Israel, for example. Ideological warfare is usually long term, right? So it can span across decades and even centuries. And military warfare is usually short term, month, year, 2 year. If it goes on a lot, for example, like the Crusades, maybe 200 years, but it does stop in between a lot. But idea wars is something that constantly happens day in and day out. In idea wars, you have spiritual and ideological damage, while in military, you just have material damage, right? You're trying to conquest minds in the first type of warfare, while the main objective of military warfare is either conquest of land or natural resources. Either wars wounds are, they're usually invisible and are often ignored because they are invisible. So your own philosophy is changing to life. You're becoming more accustomed to Western ideas of capitalism, of feminism, of LGBTQ acceptance, right? And all of these things. So they're wounds to your ideology, but because they're invisible, we usually ignore them until they manifest and become serious. But military wounds, they're usually visible, and because they're visible, people try to get treatment done to them, right? You try to get them to the hospital, the humanitarian aid to the hospital. At the same time, you have to think about those wounds which are not visible. We see many stories of the strong iman of the people over there. That does not necessarily mean every single buddy has that level of iman. Some might not have that, but we have to take care of them as well. So these are the main differences between ideological and military warfare. The one is quick, visible, and easier to counteract. The other is slow, long, usually hidden, and fighting it is not an easy task. So these were just some of the differences between ideological warfare and military warfare. And up till now, hopefully, you have a bigger picture of what idea wars look like and what they entail, and what are the things that we can possibly do to address those issues. Now, obviously, in order to understand something more completely and more holistically, we actually need to have its historical background of what it actually looks like, right? Now, when we talk about the history of ideological warfare, the first thing to actually remember is that the word itself, idea wars, it has started from whenever in history there has been a fundamental dispute in the life philosophy of any two people, right? That conflict is the spark of an ideological warfare. But I would argue that the first time this war was waged was even before time. When the dunya was not yet populated, when the concept of time was not even there, the first time that this happened was between our parents, Adam and Hawa alayhi salam, and a shaitan. So even before time, that is the first time that there was this ikhtilaf and this idea of wars in which, and I might even say that this was the first time that the war was being waged between shaitan, and he had the audacity to wage it against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because his claim was that me as Satan, as being a jinn, I am better than human beings. And so that is a fundamental idea over there, just there. Who is the better creation? And that is where this war was actually first fought. And everything that we see today is an extension of that same war, right? And across history, it has been coming, like the sons of Adam alayhi salam, like Cain and Abel, Qabil and Habil. They had an ideological conflict between the two of them of what it means to be a person of God and what it means to sacrifice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So since day one, there has been this war or these smaller conflicts going on and on and on. But like I mentioned, we are seeing it in a specific paradigm, in the paradigm of Islam. So we need to focus on ideological warfare and its timeline within the Islamic uh, history. And so the first time was actually with the Ba'tha, with the prophethood being granted to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the first time that, 3 years after a dawah as of quiet dawah, when he openly invited people to Islam, his uncle threw a stone at him, saying that, woe be to you, it is for this reason that you have gathered us. I saying that whatever you were about to say or whatever you just said is fundamentally different to what we are used to believing, and so we refuse to accept what is going on, right? And so it started from the Meccan period in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And most of us who studied Sirah would see that there were different techniques that the Kuffar used to use when waging this war. against the Muslimin, right? So, for example, in the Meccan period, um, they would try to create confusion amongst the Muslims, the Muslims who just came into Islam, and even confusion amongst normal people in order to make sure that they don't come near Islam or the Prophet Islam to hear the Quran, right? They would have different types of propaganda, um, saying that Na'udhu Billah, he was a magician or he was crazy, right? Or he was a liar. Uh, they would used to ask weird miracles from him, like rip open a river in Makkah or let your God send down angels with a written scripture or even gold, or you yourself just fly up to God, for example, all these different things, just to create an impression that what Muhammad alayhi salam has brought to us is false and fake. And they even presented him with incentives that if you stop calling towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can have the leadership of Makkah, you can have the most beautiful woman that you want, you can have all the wealth that you want, right? So all of these things like were different things, and there was even physical violence that was used against the believers in order to retract them from Islam. So these were the techniques used in order to combat Islam itself, right? The idea of Islam itself. So it began actually in Makkah. And when the Prophet Islam went to the Medina in the Medinian period of his life, there were different techniques that they used. For example, they used the technique of nifaq, hypocrisy. They would enter Islam and then try to dismantle it from within. You had the munafiqeen in Medina. The other thing was what is now we know as media. In that time, they used to use their poetry for that same purpose. And so media wars actually began when the Prophet Islam migrated to Medina. Then you had those different Christian or Judaism or Jewish communities coming to the Prophet Islam and debating him on the issue. And you even had spies amongst the Muslims in the Medina period, trying to find ways to get people away from Islam, right? So, with the start of Islam, this ideological warfare has already commenced and it's going on today. But when it really took charge, especially from the enemy side, was in 1291 Common Era, when the 200-year Crusade Wars actually ended. What happened then was that the Christians realized that you can't go head to toe with these people in the field of combat. It is impossible to defeat them, right? With their high imams and with their power at that time, it is impossible to defeat them in this way. What do we do? And so they realized the only way you can defeat them is to actually cut their connection with the Quran. And that is when initially the Christian community and then later on others began their planned long-term ideological war against the Muslims, which led to, the colonial period, which led to what we now know as Orientalism, globalization, and whatnot. But it took force and it started to run after 1291 CE, right? And it has been going on since then. But it wasn't very well known. It wasn't something that was in front of people. A lot of times what happens is that you know something, but you can't put your finger on it, or you're unable to actually describe it. And what happened is in 1978, a Palestinian Christian by the name of Edward Said published his book Orientalism. And this was the first time that we now had a voice which told us the story of exactly what is the West doing? Why is it the West colonized almost the entire world. And why is it that they treat those colonies so differently from their own people, right? And so this book, his masterpiece, Orientalism, Edward Said actually tells that the West sees the East in a different light altogether. They see them as some sort of alien creatures different from them, who were meant to be enslaved, who were meant to be put under control because they were some mystical creature of being like ignorant, being barbaric, the same kind of languages that we see today that the Israeli colonizers are trying to use against the Palestinians. Interestingly enough. It's a very good book. It's an intellectual book. Sometimes it can become difficult to grasp concepts because there are a lot of new concepts that Edward Said himself actually introduced in this book. And the impact that this had on a number of fields in humanities is profound. If you've not taken a course in humanities, in Orientalism, uh, you might not have heard of this before or might not be aware of the details, but it is something worth looking into if you actually want to understand how the West thinks. And so this it was a small timeline of ideological warfare, and it's still going on. In the next session, inshallah, we'll be talking about the fields of ideological warfare and like what are the avenues in which we are being attacked so that we can defend ourselves, and at the same time, how can we counterattack? Because honestly, the reason why we're so behind and why we're always in defensive position is that we do not attack. Whoever said that offense is the best defense was 100% on the mark. As long as you are the one who's attacking, and the other is always going to be on the back foot. But the second you become complacent and they're the ones who take charge, it'll be you who's going to have difficulty coming back. So, yes, the first thing that we will be doing is defending ourselves because we are in a vulnerable position. But at the same time, we also want to be attacking the enemy so we can actually hold ground and defend our ideology and give dava of it as we are supposed to. Um, the class is supposed to be from 1 hour to 1.5 hours, anything in between, because there'll be sometimes we might want to expand on something and an hour won't suffice. But what we're trying is to do it actually inside 1 hour to make it more palatable for everybody. Like I mentioned, there will be a book list or a reading list given to you at the end, inshallah. We'll discuss all the topics that we're going to talk about, hopefully. Uh, for today, that is everything that we have. If you guys have any questions that you want to ask, I would be happy to take them. And I will unmute your mic if you could just raise your hands. We don't want everybody talking all together. That causes a bit of confusion, though. Like I mentioned, there we are in the process of actually making a reading list. Like, obviously, if you're asking for books in Arabic, I could name you 10 right now, but this subject is not very well known or not that much discussed when it comes to the English or even the Urdu language, honestly speaking, especially in the Islamic perspective. So we are at the moment collecting details and information about the books that we can use. I'll send a list of Arabic books in the group, inshallah. الآن نغزوهم ولا يغزوننا نحن نسير إليهم. If you're asking for what the sharh of this hadith is, that the Prophet Islam mentioned that now it's we are who are going to fight them, and they're no longer going to fight us, and we will be the ones going towards them. And this was specific to him talking about his era and the kuffar of Makkah. That after the Battle of the Trench, Ahzab, uh, they no longer had any more military strength to be able to combat the Muslimin. That's when the Prophet Islam mentioned that you won't find the pagans of Makkah attacking you again. Next time, it will be us who are going to them. And that's exactly what happened. And this wasn't meant to be in the absolute sense. And so that's why we're being attacked right now on different fronts. Right, guys, so if there are no more questions that you guys have on your sides, then inshallah, I'll see you guys next week when we actually talk about the venues of ideological warfare and what are the main challenges that we're actually facing, inshallah. And at any time, if you have any suggestions about the course design or the delivery, because like I mentioned, it's a beta test, you're welcome to contact any one of the group admins with your suggestions, and inshallah, we'll take them into consideration. All right, everyone, thank you for joining us. Inshallah, I'll see you guys next week. Till then, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.